Every aspect of our society has an impact of some kind of leadership, whether it be political leadership, social, religious, sports leadership, business leadership, whatever leadership it is. So, this episode goes deep into the concepts of leadership, especially organizational leadership. In this episode, I had a great conversation with Daniel Edds, who is a management consultant for 25 years and has helped leaders create a greater impact and a highly engaged workforce. And he also has written a book called The Definitive Book of Leadership Systems, for which he has interviewed the US Army and an NFL Super Bowl champion and others. So, enjoy this episode and don't forget to subscribe. So Dan, how are you doing?
I'm good.
For those of you who don't know, this is our second meeting. The first meeting was a really good one, to be honest, but for some reason, for some technical difficulties, the audio got ruined. And as I'm a new podcaster, I'm learning from these kind of experiences because you cannot see these things. Like there are a lot of things going on behind the scene, from the lighting to the camera to the audio settings and whatnot. So I think it's going to take time and experiences like these to, learn things. So Dan, what are you doing right now? Like, what's your current work?
My current work, I work with organizations in their development of their culture, their leadership. Do a lot of consulting work with government, healthcare, nonprofits, helping them with cost recovery, and doing more with less money.
That's a great. I know people want to do more with less money, and I think what you're doing is great. So, has your work been affected by the pandemic because people are working from home since the beginning of the pandemic? So, how has your work changed?
Well, fundamentally, it hasn't changed. I still do the same stuff. But what has happened is that because most of my clients, or many of my clients anyway, they are very sensitive to local economies. And so a lot of my consulting work has just dried up. It's just now starting to pick back up again. But in the last year, it's been pretty slim, to be frank. Just because my client base is their revenues are very closely tied to the local economies.
So, which means that as the economy has gone down, their work might have gone down as well, right?
Well, it's really their revenues. So a lot of my client base is local government. So when the local economies shrink, their revenues shrink, and they don't have as much money to hire me to come tell them how to get by with less money.
So, Dan, you have a lot of experience regarding the leadership with a lot of different types of business models, like nonprofit, government, and private maybe as well. So, according to your experience and according to your knowledge, how would you define leadership?
Well, that's actually a very good question, and it's one that there is no simple answer. If we look at personal leadership, there's no standard, common, agreed upon definition of what leadership is. If you ask 10 people who write books on leadership about their definition of leadership, you're going to get 10 different answers, at least 10 different answers. What I have done in my research and in the book that I just published, I looked at leadership not as personal leadership, but I looked at it from the standpoint of the organization. And what does organizational leadership look like? And when you look at it from the standpoint of the organization, all of a sudden it becomes very systemic, meaning there's a system to it. Might be a good system, a bad system, it might be an efficient system, or a very inefficient system. but there is a system or a way of doing leadership. And much of it, frankly, much of it comes down to creating value, where leaders understand that their role is to create value. And I would argue that value comes in three different ways. Leaders are to create value in their people, meaning they are to develop people. One of the primary roles of a leader is to develop his workforce. The other one is to develop the resource of money. And what I mean by that is a fundamental job of a leader within an organization is to understand that part of his or his job is to always maximize the value of the money at his or her disposal. We might do that through some kind of process improvement initiatives, where process improvement becomes a way of extracting waste so that more value can be created with the resources that are available. The third area of value creation is in knowledge. New knowledge is the foundation of innovation. And when every leader understands that part of their task is to develop the value of knowledge and create and to develop new knowledge, all of a sudden we have a recipe for leadership that becomes highly effective, and almost anybody can do it. Doesn't take any great piece of emotional intelligence.
You know, with the rise of the internet culture, I have seen many rise in forums and, you know, occasions where they arrange certain a type of event where they welcome youngsters and some successful or popular people to, you know, give them some lessons, maybe about leadership, maybe about how to run a business, or maybe motivation or life lessons. So these kind of events have grown exponentially, according to my observation. And even on social media and on YouTube, there are many successful YouTube channels who provides motivation about leadership, how to run a business, how to start a business. So with this rise of these things, have you seen any improvement of leadership?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. And the simple answer is no. And there's actually a significant bit of research that's coming out of places like Harvard, Stanford University, the Gallup organization, and others that are beginning to say, wait a minute, we're spending, just here in the States, we are spending somewhere in the area of $50 billion a year in leadership development. That's books, courses, seminars, you know, you name it. And there is no evidence that it has any organizational ROI. Worldwide, that number goes up to a minimum of around $150 billion a year. Some estimates approach $350 billion a year. Again, there's no evidence that it's actually doing any good in the sense that it's creating better leaders. In fact, the evidence is such that the general state of leadership is not getting better, it's getting worse.
So why do you think it's happening? Because I think it's important to deal with it, because if we are not giving birth to leaders, or not creating to leaders or capable leaders, then who is going to run the future economy, or who is going to run the next big tech company or big company? So why do you think it's happening? What's the main reason?
Well, because our understanding of leadership, one of the analogies that I've used is, you know, the warships from England when England ruled the seas, and a battleship was a you know, a masted schooner sailing the world, where a single captain knew every component of that ship, technically knew everything about that ship and how to sail. and he was the god or the king of that particular ship, and everybody did what they were told because he was the most experienced and the best educated. And yet our basic understanding of leadership hasn't really changed much since then. There has been a number of people that have begun to say, you know, we are approaching leadership the same way we did when Henry Ford was producing Model T Fords in the early 1900s. Today, we have a small organization has 500 to 1,000 people in its, you know, on the workforce. A modest size organization has 5 to 10,000 people. A large organization has hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom are better educated and better trained than the CEO. And so, but we still have this old-fashioned idea that leadership is about me exerting influence over you, and it's about my leadership and my team. And if you're on my team, somehow I'm supposed to motivate you and influence you. And that works for a short period of time in small teams. But when you multiply it over organizations that have 500, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 or more, it doesn't work anymore. Then we have to look at leadership differently. And what does the organization need from its leadership to achieve its mission? And that's when we get into the realm of systemic leadership, or basically it's a model of leadership that says, if you're a leader in this organization, this is how we do it.
So, Dan, you said that it's not working, like the events and motivational content and, you know, people interacting about and talking about leadership is not working. So how do you make it work?
Well, I think we need to understand that there's a difference between leadership development as a personal growth opportunity. I have friends who do leadership development, and what they're really doing is helping people to become better human beings. And so I think we need to understand that there is value to that. And I'm not about to discount the value of that. I think anytime you can help someone to become more self-confident, more self-assured, more confident of their own skills and abilities, I think that's a good thing. But we also need to recognize that organizationally, that doesn't necessarily turn into better organizations or better leaders within an organization. And to do that, what we need to do is think of an organization as a series of systems. There are systems in every organization. There are systems for human resource, for process improvement, for operations, for engaging with customers, and systems that for doing finance and tracking financial transactions. But we also need to recognize that leadership itself is a system, and I would argue the most important system. And when we design the leadership system, then we have the opportunity to bring people into that system and train them to the requirements of that system. You might think about it in terms of organizational culture. Cultures are either left to evolve or they're designed. And leadership is, in fact, the greatest contributor to organizational culture. And so when we start out with, the standpoint of here is the organizational DNA, that culture that we want to create, then we can start training leaders to the requirements of that culture. I would even, I'll give you an example. A manufacturing company that I know, they have 200 employees. They are doing phenomenal work. Their desire is to create a culture where the leaders support the frontline worker in the battle to find and eliminate waste in the manufacturing process. Just that concept right there flips the traditional model of leadership as me telling you what to do. In their understanding of leadership, that is flipped so that the leader is telling or not telling, but asking his or her subordinates, what do you need from me today? What do you need from me to help mentor you in finding and eliminating waste? If you get an idea of how to improve a system, how to improve a process, let's talk about it. I will support you in doing that. That's an entirely different kind of leadership than the traditional models, which is based on me motivating you or me telling you what to do.
I think what you're talking okay, I think what you're talking about is called Kaizen, maybe. And
yeah, actually they do Kaizen, and they're huge implementers of Kaizen, and they call it Kaizen. So if I'm working for you, and I say, hey, I've got an idea. There's something going on here. I think I have an idea how we can eliminate the possibility of an error. I'm going to come to you and say, I think I see an opportunity to do a Kaizen on this particular process. Your job then is not to say that's a good idea or bad idea. Your job is to help coach me through the Kaizen process, because it's a defined process. Now, I don't particularly care if you call it Kaizen or Lean, or there's other methodologies to improve processes, but in their case, they're developing a culture where the leader, their job is to support the frontline worker. And if you don't want to do leadership that way, you're not going to stick around, because you're not doing leadership the way they want you to do it.
So basically what you're trying to say, I think, is that in traditional leadership, one man or a couple of people controls everything. And some people might agree with it, and some people might not agree with it. So in this new leadership system, we need to get everyone involved so that they do not feel demotivated. And as everyone shares their ideas, innovation can speed up. And these days, if you cannot be innovative, you will, depending on what kind of industry you work on, if you cannot be innovative and cannot stay on top of what's happening in the market, it's very hard to be competitive.
Yep. Yeah, it really comes down to basic elementary school math. If you have a company of, let's say, 500 people, do you want one person, or maybe even two or three, whose job is to innovate, to create new ideas, to come up with new and innovative products and services? Or do you want to put the intellectual capacity of every employee on innovation and creating new process and services? Well, basic math would say, I'd rather have 500 people looking at innovative new ideas rather than one or two or three. It's just really simple math. And so to do that, though, requires leadership that understands that my job as a leader is to somehow create the culture where people come to work and they're not afraid to express a new idea. They're not afraid to ask a question. They're not afraid to say, you know, I think there's a better way of doing this. That takes courage. You know, if you're in a meeting with 10 people and 9 of them are all going in the same direction, but one person says, wait a minute, there's something we're not, there's another idea here, another perspective that we need to take into account. That takes courage. Furthermore, it takes a leader who says, I appreciate that kind of courage. May not agree, but let's appreciate and in fact reward for that people for that kind of courage.
So according to you, and I think if many people get involved in it, they share their own ideas, innovation is going to speed up. But at the same time, if you consider everyone's opinion, won't it increase the bureaucracy or something like that? Because it's going to, because you're considering everyone's idea instead of just focusing on the people you've appointed for bringing those ideas. So won't it increase the time of making decisions?
Well, it could, I suppose. And various cultures handle that differently. My understanding of, like say, Japanese culture, that's very based on consensus. They don't move forward until there is a consensus and everybody agrees, yes, this is our direction. Other cultures, here in the U.S., we sort of pride ourselves in being adventuresome and fast-paced, and consensus is okay as long as it doesn't take too long. But when we have cultures, when we can create organizational cultures where people are free to speak up, where they feel safe, where they are valued and appreciated, and when they have the courage to speak up, what happens, I think, is that you don't need as much bureaucracy. You don't need all of the bureaucracy that's designed to corral people, to control people, or to motivate people. People become self-motivated. And I think the evidence is that costs go down, customer satisfaction goes up, profitability goes up. When you create cultures where people are free to express themselves, the way I describe it is we unleash the basic human capacity that we all share. As human beings, we all share a capacity for creativity, for transformation, for new thinking, for innovation, and thinking outside the box. And when you create organizational cultures where people are free, really, to be fully human, those organizations end up doing better long term by wide margins.
That's a very good point you've made. But businesses traditionally have hierarchies, right? From the top CEO or the shareholders to the bottom, such as employees. So isn't it normal for a person who is a CEO or the founder of the company to think that, oh, my employees they do not understand how the business works, or they do not understand this and they do not understand that. So if you have that kind of mentality from the beginning, so isn't it really hard for them to accept their innovative ideas? So how do you put that aside as a leader of a company? How do you put that mindset aside?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because if you or I were to go out and start a business today, and it's successful and it grows and it builds, just almost because we are who we are, we're going to think that it all rests on our shoulders. But the reality is, if a leader can understand, let's say an entrepreneur can understand that he or she can design a model of doing leadership where the workforce itself shares the responsibility of leadership. A, there's less pressure. B, what you've just done is empowered your workforce. If I, as a leader, if I have a company of, let's say, 500 employees, and I think that my ideas are the best, and it's all rests on me, and I will be the final decision maker for all significant decisions, what I do is I disempower my workforce. I say, I don't trust you. I say, I don't respect you. I don't respect your intelligence. And therefore, I want all decisions to come through me. Well, what I would have just done is disempower my employees, disrespected my employees. And oh, by the way, I wonder why my employees don't like working for me.
So, you just said that it's important to involve all kinds of people, employees, to, to increase the innovation and to, motivate, to make them feel motivated and feel like they're part of the company, right? So there can be some people who are not interested in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Many people do not have that kind of character. You can say that they're a type of introvert or something like that. And many people actually have, different people have actually different methods of communication, right? So
Mm-hmm.
how do you, given that they have different methods of communication or expressing their ideas, how do you make them express their ideas? Because if they do not like the way the company asks their ideas for, then they might not want to share their ideas, or
Sure.
they might not want to get involved. And it's not like everyone wants to participate. There are many people who just do it for the money,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so if they do not participate in it, that means they're not contributing to the innovative part, or they are not motivated. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you get them involved in it?
Well, I think there's a couple of things involved, and that's an excellent question. As all your questions seem to be really, really, really good. And I think there's two parts to it. One is that the vast majority of people really do want to contribute to their organization. I've worked with probably at least 200 different organizations, and I have yet to find one where people, on average, did not care about working for a high performing organization. They wanted to, and they were more than willing to sacrifice personal time to help their organization become more productive, more excellent. So that's a basic understanding that on average, people, in fact, do want to work for a high impact, high innovative, high performing organization. The second part of your question is really about rewards. Too many organizations feel like, well, I pay them a salary, that is their reward. And the fact of the matter is, a salary will get an employee in the door, but on balance, it won't keep them in the door. Here in the States, millennials, especially millennials and whatever the generation is that's following millennials, they're very plain. We're here for an experience. If we don't get the right experience, we walk. Part of that experience is they expected to be respected. And so it doesn't take much. Just to give you an example, the manufacturing company that I referenced, and you asked me about Kaizen. Anytime anybody comes up with a Kaizen or a way of improving a process, or a way of extracting waste, or eliminating the potential for an error, there's a formal process that they go through. The responsibility of the leader is to help coach the employee through that process. But that employee gets 30 minutes of paid time off, or PTO. Now, that's not a lot, especially when you consider that every Kaizen saves the company about $1,000. So 30 minutes of paid time off is not a lot, but it's a recognition. It's a positive recognition that we value your contribution to this organization. And I don't know how many people actually contribute with observations and doing Kaizens, but it would be probably the majority I'm guessing somewhere around 2/3 of the company, if not more, is actively contributing Kaizens. In fact, on average, every employee contributes 5 to 6 new ideas of how to extract waste from their manufacturing systems and processes. That means that those, there are some who don't contribute at all, but those who contribute a lot. And each one, as I said, each new idea, each Kaizen saves the company $1,000. They are extracting 4 to 5% of gross sales out of their cost structure each and every year. Where does that additional value flow? Well, some of that value flows to their customers. They're getting better products of higher quality and better performance. But some of that value also flows right back to employees in the form of higher bonuses, higher contributions to retirement plans, and some of that value flows right back to the shareholders in terms of higher profit.
So I can understand that it's very important to involve everyone to, at least share the ideas, because I have read this theory called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and probably one of the basic needs, I think, I don't remember exactly, but is like, social needs is like at the at the bottom of it. And as it gets higher and higher, you can say the payments and I do not remember it exactly, but I'm just telling what I think I remember about it. So please, guys, do not pick me about it. So like feeling involved in the company or feeling that you're part of a company is a very important element, and it's going to drive your growth. And you can see that on the overall performance, because if the employees or the stakeholders are motivated, they're going to achieve their goals much faster at a higher quality, and people are going to feel good about it. So often you can, what I think have not done any businesses yet, but often I think is that people make this mistake of focusing on shortcoming things. Like in short term, it's going to increase your cost, people, and it's going to reduce profit margin. But people often like overlook the long-term impact, which is a stronger brand value, higher market share, greater impact, which is going to solidify your place in the industry and in the market. So I think people need to learn to balance between the long-term focus and the short-term focus.
Yep. That's very true, and that's a huge issue, especially when so many organizations are run by finance people, and finance people are very good at seeing dollars going out, dollars coming in, and can make a very quick decision. But it's important that we do have the long-term perspective, and the whole idea of continuous process improvement or continuous improvement is based on, let's not figure out how we can overnight transform the company. Let's find a number of short-term initiatives that will incrementally improve a process, a system, a product, or a service, where you take enough short-term incremental improvements and you put them together over time, and all of a sudden you've made a massive improvement in process and performance. And frankly, Toyota is the master of that. In 1949, Toyota was on the verge of bankruptcy. Today, they are the most profitable car manufacturing company in the world by far. They don't focus on, short-term, let's see, how would I say that? They don't focus on short-term knee-jerk reactions. They have that future in mind all the time, and they really focus on small incremental changes that over time have a massive effect.
So we talked about a few problems till now about leadership, and for example, like even after spending so much money, why are we failing to create good leaders? So tell me about your book. Like, how does your book cover all these things, and what's give maybe a summary or something like that? What is it about?
Sure. Well, thank you. I always appreciate that question. Um, you know, when I began to write the book, or actually when I began to do the research, I'd been doing management consulting for over 20 years. And like I'd said, I probably worked with a couple of hundred different organizations. And there was no one point in time, but at some point I began to ask myself the question, how do high performing organizations approach the practice of leadership? Just to give you one example that began to trigger this idea for me, I had done a project. It was a large organization. They had almost 200 employees. It was a government agency. They regulated over 450,000 healthcare providers every year. And they were a mess. I mean, they were a mess. Got done with the project. There was light at the end of the tunnel. There was clear direction on what needed to be done. I'm having my final conversation with the deputy director, woman who was highly qualified, very competent to do her job, but she was stuck in a bad system. And I was just about ready to walk out the door, and almost in a tone of confession, she said, you know, I don't even tell my friends where I work anymore. And I turned around and I said, why not? She said, it's just too embarrassing. And that's when I began to say, what's going on here? Here is, and I knew the director, again, a woman of tremendous accomplishment. But what I began to see, eventually what I began to see was that there's a system involved, and the system always has greater strength than the individual. Deming said, a bad system will overpower a good person every day of the week. So I began to look at high impact, high performing organizations in healthcare, manufacturing, nonprofit, the military. I did research on a National Football League Super Bowl champion, which is here in the States is a big deal. I looked at any number of organizations that were performing at a high level of performance over a long period of time. And what I began to see was they don't do leadership where every leader is allowed to do their own thing in their own way and to their own personal values. They start out with a system and says, okay, if you're a leader in this organization, here's how we do leadership. Here's the values that you will model in your behaviors. Here's the routines, standard work of every leader. Here's some rules that's going to empower your workforce. And they coach and teach and train every leader to the requirements of their system. Take for example, my son, when he was in the 6th grade, tried out for the school basketball team. I actually write about this in the book. It was a small school. They could barely field a team. There was, I think, 9 young boys who wanted to play basketball. The school hired a coach, and the coach was, he had played some basketball in college, and that was about it. There was no superstar athletes. There was no high expectation for a league championship. And, but this coach recognized that if he can train these boys to play basketball to a system that was based on team first, to make and team performance. It was all about the team. It wasn't about personal scoring. It wasn't about personal, statistics. It was playing together as a team. And he designed a system of how to play basketball that way. And in 3 years, those boys went from losing every one of their games, and not by, they're all by wide margins. If they lost a game when they were, within 5 points, it was considered a victory. In 3 years, they went undefeated, and they won their league championship. It was not about the, there was some talent, but it was really about harnessing that talent in a system that required team play. And they became, both the team and those boys became champions.
One interesting thing I noticed here is that when people think about organization or leadership, they think about like leadership in a business or society or political leader. But what many of people do not understand is that, or they don't realize that leadership lies in every small areas of our society. It can be, businesses, political leaders, a sports team, and even the leader of a family, or in leader of a church or any religious institution. People need to realize that having the wrong idea or concept about leadership is going to not only have an impact on businesses or political sides, it's going to have a negative impact on every small aspect, because in some way or the other, every small aspect of our society is determined by what kind of leadership it is governed by.
Yep, absolutely true. And that's as true if it's a mom or a dad in a family, and it's just as true if it's a government agency. Probably more true in a government agency, because the impact is so great. So a bad leader, a leader who wants to exert personal power, and they're all about personal power at the expense of everybody else, well, unfortunately, that government is going to be destructive to people.
And that might create a lot of chaos. People, they might, protest against the government or something like that, which is going to create a negative impact or negative image about the country or the society, because, these days news are really readily available. People can, get any kind of news of what's happening in any country based on how much media coverage they have. And this can have an impact on international imports and exports and trade relations, because normally if the political condition of a country is not stable, businesses do not want to invest on that, because that can cause a lot of loss or harm. Maybe that can destroy the inventories, and people are very fierce. Depending on what kind of organization it is, normally businesses would not, have an operation in which the political environment is unstable. And so I think this is very important for the government of whichever country it is to, be a good leader, listen to their, people maybe, and try to maintain the peace. And as far as I remember, in the very beginning of the podcast, you said that there is no, definition of leadership. So how would you define whether a political leader is good or bad? Because to you or to me, that leader might be abusive, but to someone else, they might be really good.
Yeah. Well, I think the answer to that question, and there's no one single answer. But I think I may have mentioned this, but one of the fundamental roles that a leader plays, and I don't care if it's, leader of a country, leader of a large corporation, leader of a local government, leader of a local school. One of the fundamental roles that a leader plays is the development of their people. So does the leader have the view that people are an asset that can be bought and sold, traded off and on? Or does the leader have a mindset that people are a resource that can be developed for ever increasing value? When the leader has that perspective, then they're going to be looking at people not as an asset that can be bought and sold, but people as an unbelievable resource for creativity, for innovation, and transformation. Now, if you are a citizen of a country and the government said, we believe our citizens are assets. If they do their job, that's great. If they don't do their job, we're going to get rid of them. Or are people a resource and we want to develop the resource of our people? What are you going to get there? Well, you're probably going to get education. You're probably going to get healthcare. You're going to get mental health, because people are a resource that need to be developed. And when leaders have that mindset, that's when people grow. And that's when, in a government, that's when citizens can grow. That's when citizens are free to innovate and to transform and to create. And you could probably think of a few countries, as can I, where the leader or leaders have this mindset of people are an asset. If you contribute, fine. If not, we're going to get rid of you one way or another. Or our people are resource, and we want to develop the resource of people. Look at those countries that have those different mindsets, and what you're going to see is abuse and trauma and a bad economy on one hand. On the other hand, you're going to find thriving economies. Nothing's perfect. You're not going to find utopia. But when government understands that their people are a resource that need to be developed, you find thriving economies, you find freedom, you find people doing well economically and personally at every level.
I think when I was listening to what you're saying, two countries popped up in my mind. At the very beginning of the pandemic, people, there were just panics and all around, and some of the people were listening to the government and some are not listening to the government. And I think it's more or less the same cases right now here as well. So one country came into my mind, and that is New Zealand. I don't know about many other countries, but New Zealand's I think they managed the pandemic very well because they listened to their government. They listened to the prime minister. They obeyed their what she said, and during staying home and quarantining and wearing masks and maintaining all social protocols. And there were other countries where they did not obey their government at all. Maybe there are different kinds of social aspects related in this scenario. And in some countries, the government themselves were not educated enough. But keeping all that aside, I felt like whenever I saw the Prime Minister of New Zealand, she talks, or she, thinks as a community. Even though she's a Prime Minister, she thinks New Zealand as to be a community, which is why I think she's different from other kind of prime ministers normally. And which is why I think, after listening to what you've just said, this clicked in my mind that maybe this is the reason why New Zealand managed to, keep the pandemic at a very low level in their country, whereas some of the big countries with high, very good healthcare facilities did not.
Yeah, well, that's a great observation. New Zealand does have some advantages that many countries do not. One, it's an island. you, you know, it's pretty easy for them to close the borders and say, you don't get in. Second of all, it's a pretty homogenous culture. You know, there's, as I understand New Zealand, and I can be easily proved wrong, you know, it's a pretty homogenous culture. Well, if you take even here in the U.S., we have, you know, we have many cultures within the one, and so plus we have a basic distrust of government, which right now is working to our disadvantage, I believe. But you're right. New Zealand has done a wonderful job, and I think it's you use the phrase, the prime minister has the understanding that she's really in charge of a community. And when you think about a population as a community, probably a community of many communities, you are automatically, I think, understanding that people have value, that people are not just an asset, but people have intrinsic value. And when you understand that, as I think she does, you just end up having a different relationship with them. And I think you're right. They've done a fabulous job. I would not use the word obey, like the people have obeyed their government. I would use the word people have trusted their government and are behaving accordingly. Right now, in our country, the US, people who are not getting vaccinated, of which I have several friends, and I think they're crazy. The reason they're not getting vaccinated is because they don't trust the government. And I understand that. You know, it's kind of in the US, we just inherently, if the government says, you know, the sky is blue, we're going to go, no, I don't think so. So when the government says we want you to get vaccinated, there's a healthy percentage of our population that says we don't trust you. But it doesn't have to do with obedience. It has to do with trust. In other countries, it might be different. But I think in New Zealand, here in the U.S., it really is an issue of trust rather than obedience.
So, like, moving on from political and organizational leadership to, you know, leadership for the youth, I think it's very important because I myself am a young person and I would like to know about what it's going to be like in the future and how I can, or people like me, can become good leaders in the future, right? So, you know, a few years ago, I remember clearly, I saw a video from Simon Sinek, and in part of the video, he was telling that, you know, these days there are young people coming in and they're just, you know, new workers or employees in the company, and they just want to leave the job immediately. And when Simon asks them, like, why do you want to leave the job? They say that they're feeling like they're not being able to create an impact, right? And so it's a very good thing that they want, like, people like me wants to create an impact, which I want to do it as well. But as I've grown up, I realized that it takes time to become or to create impact or to become a good leader. And these days, you know, everything you get almost instantly. Like, you want to watch a show, go to Netflix, and it's there. You want to buy something, go to Amazon, it's there. You want to learn something, go to YouTube, it's there. So do you think that technology is creating a negative mindset for youth like us for becoming good leaders?
No, I don't think technology has anything to do with it. I think technology might be able to enhance it. But the research says that having raised a young man who's now almost 30 years old, he's just turned 29, it's really an issue of different perspectives on generations. So in my generation, when I was growing up in my home, if my father said jump, my only question was how high. I never expected my father or anybody really of his generation to reach out to me and say, Dan, how can I help you? But in honesty, there was a few who did. But generationally, at least here in the States, your generation, the older generation has consistently reached out to you and tried to build a relationship with you. You know, my generation has told your generation that you're special, that you could do anything you want, that you have a bright, intelligent mind. If you want to change the world, you can. And so you grow up with this expectation that you can change the world. And frankly, I think it's terrific. I love it when a young person like yourself says, hey, I want to change the world. I believe I can make an impact. And I say, what is wrong with bright, well-educated, good-intentioned young men and women saying they want to change the world? I happen to think that's a great thing. But you're going to suffer the same challenges that everybody else faces, different challenges probably. And one of those will be leadership. I think, frankly, that many of your generation are better able to handle the challenges of leadership than in my generation. And I look forward to that. I think it's terrific.
It's going to be interesting to see how leaders of my generation turn out to be, because the previous generation and my generation seems to be very different, because
yep.
I have to communicate in a different language with my parents, even
sure.
though we are from the same country, from the same culture, but
yeah.
The internet and the rise of technology has created a huge difference in terms of understanding and opportunities and different kinds of aspects of our society. And I think it has triggered some kind of change in many social aspects as well, because people were not aware of many things which they're aware of now, just because of the internet or the presence of internet.
What I think technology has done is sped up the process of change and innovation.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes with culture. It's just made it go faster. So just what you and I are doing right now. I'm in Seattle, Washington, and you're in Bangladesh, and we're talking like best friends, and you're right next door. I mean, how crazy is that? And
my grandma always, praises the creator of Facebook or the internet, because she does not live here, and the only way she can communicate with us is over the internet. So every time she speaks on the phone, she's like, "Oh, God bless the guy who invented this thing."
Yeah, because she wants to see you. So, but you take that what we're doing right now and what your grandmother does, and now you could say, okay, if I have a team in Seattle, Washington, and there's another team in Bangladesh or Australia or New Zealand or India, now all of a sudden we can bring the opportunity for innovation and collaboration just grows exponentially. Massive growth, potentially massive growth in innovation. Now, I would argue that great technology is just a platform. It does not create innovation. It is a platform for innovation. Innovation still comes down to me sharing my idea with you and you saying, I agree with 6 parts, I don't agree with 4 parts, and then let's talk about it. And you convince me, I convince you. And out of our conversations, probably is going to become a better product or a better service, assuming that we're working for the same organization.
And I think what you briefly touched about here is that about tolerance. And I think people, in some way or the other, some people have become more tolerant than they were before, because, before the age of technology or communication, people used to think what their surrounding tells is true, or what they think is true. But the internet has opened a wide kind of ideas and ideologies And certainly, I don't know about other people, but I firmly believe that I sometimes feel like, oh, this can also be a possibility as well. This can also be a possibility as well. And so this reduces, my sense of ego that no, I'm not always right. And in order to express my ideas and to grow, I need to learn from people. And which is one of the main reasons I started this podcast, because I get to talk with great people like you, and through this process I get to learn things by myself, for myself as well, and also share the knowledge with other people.
I'm not a great lover of the word tolerance. I understand the concept. I don't necessarily disagree with it. The problem with tolerance is inherently, at least the way I observe conversations around tolerance is, we all want to be tolerant with each other as long as we agree. But as soon as we disagree, well, then you're intolerant. I am tolerant, but you are breaking our relationship because you're a bad person. You are intolerant. And philosophically, that idea of tolerance doesn't work. Eventually, it just breaks down. The word that I would use, though, is respect. You're younger than me. I happen to think that if I respect you, I can treat you as an equal. We may disagree on many things, but I can still treat you as an equal if I respect you. And the same thing for you with me. Ultimately, innovation requires a high level of respect for each other. I have to respect your thoughts, your opinion, your perspective, your life history, your life story, where you come from, your family, the social structures within your society. If I respect that, I don't have to agree with it, but I can respect the fact that it is your life story. And the same thing for you with me. You don't have to be tolerant of me as someone who's older, but you might respect me for someone who is older because they have a little bit more experience than you do. So that's the word I prefer, is respect, and really perspective, that you and I are going to look at the world very differently. It's not that our perspectives are wrong. They're just different. And respect says, I can respect your worldview. I can respect your perspective. I may not agree with it, but I could certainly respect it because it's your perspective.
I think it's okay to have different ideas, different perspective. What's not okay is that thinking you are right and everyone else is wrong. And which is why you need to end that relationship or friendship or whatever that is. Because if anyone has that kind of mentality, I think it's going to be really hard for that person to find a friend or a good partner, because you will not find anyone who 100% matches with your ideas and ideologies, right? And so to build good relationship or even a good leadership community, I think it's important to acknowledge the differences and be like, okay, this is your thought, this is my thought, let's talk about it and figure out which one is right. And if you still think that this one is right, this one is wrong, and it's different from my idea, okay, that's fine, but we can still be friends. We can still respect each other. We can still work together without abusing one another.
Yeah. So in case you couldn't tell, I'm a white guy. And but a man that I know, he's older than I am. If we were in politics, he would be in one party and I would be in the other, and most of our political votes would offset each other. My friend is an African American man. He grew up on the East Coast of the United States. His father was a day laborer, which means that he would go to a construction site and he would do the grunt work. And And my friend Jerry grew up in that environment, and he remembers going into a restaurant and said, "You're black, out the door, and down down the street, or come in through the back door." And I've known him for a long time, but it's just been the last few years that we've really become friends. And we become friends because one day I called him up and I said, "I want to have breakfast with you, and here's what I want to learn. What's it like as an African American man to raise a family?" So we sat down for breakfast. I asked him that question, and 3.5 hours later, we had to leave the restaurant because they were getting ready to serve lunch. And he has a completely different perspective on America than I do. But I have to respect his perspective, and he has helped change and transform and grow my own perspective of my own country and its history and its culture, just because he has helped me to see life through his eyes. And I consider him one of the most important relationships in my life right now. But it has nothing to do with my tolerance of him. It has everything to do with because I respect him enormously.
People need to learn to respect each other, and parents should also teach kids to respect each other. I think, especially in this kind of community or this kind of world, because it's all integrated, maybe through online or in any other way. So you will see, or you will meet a lot of different kinds of people, and obviously most of them will not match with your ideologies or thinking. So if you do not learn to respect each other, I think you're going to end up being lonely, and that's not any kind of feeling
you think
which people want to have.
Very true, very true. But there's a lot of people who would rather be alone than to have really wonderful, good, healthy relationships.
But I think that goes behind the fundamentals of human being, because if you see that, I do not have much idea about history or things like that, but as much as I know, humans survived through the hostile conditions to this stage because of their sense of being together and society. Imagine in a place where you did not have any buildings or houses like this. You do not have and you were wild amongst animals. If you did not manage to stay together, probably the animal will feel that you're a weak person and they might attack you or even kill you. Right? So from that basic sense, people started to come together, and they started distributing roles according to strength and gender and whatnot. So
right.
Even sometimes I also want to stay alone, but I feel like at some point you need some kind of relationship, meaningful relationship, in order to be satisfied.
Right. So I have my mother is 96 years old.
Yeah.
And she lives in a small apartment, 1-bedroom apartment, and she needs a lot of care. Rapidly, more and more care all the time. But her basic needs have not changed. She needs something to look forward to every day. She needs people companionship in her life every day. When I go visit with her, and she hasn't been outside her apartment except for maybe to get dinner or lunch. She's not spoken to any of her friends. She's in a different mindset than when she spent the afternoon visiting with 3 or 4 or 5 of her other lady friends, and like she was yesterday, actually, where they were sitting out on a patio eating ice cream in the sun. just four or five ladies enjoying the afternoon together. Last night when I saw her, she was energized, she was motivated, she was happy. Yeah, she's 96 years old. She's tired, but she felt good about herself. She felt good about where she was at, simply because she spent the afternoon with four or five other of her friends, and they had the opportunity just to talk, just to be together and eat some ice cream.
So, like, you know, at the end of the day, when people, do not have any kind of things to do, or they're near to the age of retirement, they, basically become like babies, right?
Mm-hmm.
They need to be taken care of. They need some companionship. And I think if we live long enough, we're all going to go to that stage. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it can get irritating as active people. But I think,
Mm-hmm.
here again, you need to think from a different perspective, from their perspective, and try to balance between your own perspective and their perspective. And that's how I think peace and harmony exists in society. Because if you always kind of keep on picking each other, and
Mm-hmm.
you're not going to have a peaceful society. So
Mm-hmm.
what I've learned about leadership from this podcast till now is that leadership is not about being, focusing on yourself and earning more money and power. It's about giving to people, right? It's about being selfless, thinking about the whole community, how to engage with them, how to bring the most out of them, not necessarily uh, for your own benefit, or for your own company's benefit, but
Mm-hmm.
so that they feel engaged. Because
Mm-hmm.
when people start working, they they like spend most of their time on their career, and so if they do not feel engaged, I think they are wasting a huge part of their life. And so if you'll have to be responsible as an employer. People think that's that it's only the person's responsibility, but no. After talking to you, I think I realized that it's also the leader's responsibility, that they fail to make them feel happy and engaged. So from all your leadership experiences, talking with people, what's the number one thing you would like young people like me to learn about leadership?
Yeah, great question. You ask a lot of really good questions. I really appreciate that about you. So let me close this conversation in this way. The United States Army has several core values, one of which is selfless service. But the Army goes a little bit further and defines selfless service in this way. The role of an Army officer is to put the welfare of the nation, the Army, and their subordinates, three groups of people, the welfare of the nation, the Army, and their subordinates above their own, meaning above their own welfare. What would happen in agencies of government, industry, technology, at any level, if leaders were trained, fundamentally trained and coached and mentored and rewarded to put the welfare of their subordinates and their customers above their own welfare? I believe we would radically transform the world. And it would happen at an exponential scale. Just that idea. Put the welfare of your customers and your subordinates above your own welfare. That idea is so simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is so simple. that if leaders at all levels would do that, they would transform society.
That's a very intellectual answer. And to understand, I think, to understand the depth of the answer, people need to think about it and ponder about it. So just to conclude this conversation, this amazing conversation, what are your top 3 learnings from your career about on coaching leadership, different kinds of organizations? If you want to summarize it in top 3 learnings, what are your top 3 learnings?
One is something we've talked about, which is people have intrinsic value, meaning they walk in the door, they walk on into the job, they have value just because they walked in the door. Smart organizations understand that when they develop that value, they're developing a person of unimaginable capacity for creativity and innovation. And the job of a leader is to capture that. I think number 2 is that we really need to start rethinking our whole idea of leadership. Leadership today doesn't work as long as we think that I'm the leader, I'm the boss, I'm going to tell you what to do. If I'm a good leader, I'm going to motivate you to do what I want you to do. If I'm a bad leader, I'm going to coerce you to do what I want you to do. That model of leadership flat out doesn't work anymore. And I think it's a good thing. At least it doesn't work here in the States anymore or in the West. The third thing, I think the third thing that I would say would be just exactly what we talked about. If I as a human being, if I as a leader can put my customers, the welfare of my customer, people that I interface with, my subordinates, if I could put their welfare above my own, not only will I transform my company, my community, my organization, my broader communities, I'm going to be a happier, more individual person. And I think that's a good thing.
So anything, last few sentences you want to say to my audience or people who might listen it or watch it on YouTube or listen it on Spotify or any other platforms? Any last message for them?
The only thing I would say was if they want to get a copy of my book, they can go to my website, danieledds.com. If you're outside the States, you're going to have to get the electronic version, which is it's a Kindle file and easily downloadable for $10 or something, whatever it is.
Where can people follow your work?
My website, LinkedIn would be one place. And then the other place would be my website, danieledds.com. And it's DANIELEDDS.com.
So Dan, again, I think this was a very fruitful conversation. The reason I'm saying again, because people might not be able to relate with it, because there are 2 times before I talked with Dan, and every time it was a deep conversation full of learnings and full of observations. So thank you, Dan. Thanks a lot. Actually, when I was thinking about sending the email, I was feeling very ashamed that the first time you had so much trouble connecting and all the setup, but again the audio came out not that good. I felt like you might turn me down or something like that. But now I tried my luck, and here we are again. So Dan, thank you, and
you're welcome.
Hopefully we will meet again about talking about leadership and different kind of society and what you have learned and what you will learn about in the future about leadership. Thank you, Dan.
Be delighted. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.